I think now we could get into a particular issue. I'm going to put this on the screen now, which is always relevant at this time of year. We're talking about minhagim. As the fans of this channel know, the Rav has a whole lot to say about the issue of avoiding Kitniyot on Passover. I'm not going to get into that in particular. I'm just going to get into a more general topic. We're going to discuss what would the Shulchan Aruch say on certain related issues, more general issues. What did the Torah say? And we're going to see what Rambam would say, because Rambam, he sees things entirely differently. And I hope it would have be of utility, of a toeleth to everybody. So this is the source sheet we're looking at. And then we're going to get into Kitniyos just a little bit, something just to point out, to add to the discussion a little bit. So let's dive right into it. This is sources, the Torah and Beis Yosef, Yoredea Mark, ratio dollar, which would be 214. We're going to eventually, by the way, see how Rambam understood this, because the original sources are not necessarily Talmudic. These are all inferences and deductions from various Talmudic discussions, but none of it are explicit, which is why the Rambam could take such a radically different approach when we actually see it. Those who want their own copies, I could send it on the phone. I think I sent it out to some people so you could see it. I did make a PDF of it though, so it's still in a Pages document. Let's see it over here. What does the Torah say? You'll see that the Torah is used as for what the Shulchan Aruch said, and it's elaborated upon. There are things that are technically possible. Others who know that they're permissible, yet they still act. They still practice that is forbidden. Okay, for whatever reason, we have a minhag, we don't partake of this, or we don't allow ourselves whatever this heter is. Havi ki'ilu kibulum alehem beneder. It's as though they accepted upon themselves as a solemn vow. Okay, a person says a neder, I take upon myself. Usually, neder was a person takes upon himself not to do something. It's what relates to the word isar. That's most of the time. The word, not the word asur, meaning for prohibited in the Torah, but you do have that shorish used as a person takes upon a prohibition upon himself. He'll, for example, it uses the example of a woman, she will refrain from eating a particular food. To her, that food is as though it is forbidden by the Torah. That example, because we need an example to work with, or peanuts over here, like we have. Asur lahatiram lahem, and it's forbidden to, I guess, for others, Jews who know what they're doing, to permit it for them. That means tell them, no, just go ahead and eat it. This woman took a vow not to eat potato chips, or she has a practice. Her family, or this group, say there are people, acherim, they all know that potato chips are inherently permissible according to the Torah, I guess, assuming there's no health problems with eating them. But this whole group of people, they don't eat potato chips for whatever reason. It's as though they took it upon themselves by vow. Why is that? He said, Havi ki'ilu, because they didn't take a solemn vow to do so. They've just been practicing it so long, it's now become like a vow. So you can't just tell them it's permissible. Hilkach, therefore, let's say a person has a practice not to eat meat, or to even just fast, not eat anything. Lihitanot means not eat anything, bisman yadu, at a certain time. By the way, there are many such minhagim, and there have been different minhagim in different incarnations. We're going to see that later, and perhaps even earlier authorities gave examples, which the Shulchan Aruch is going to mention, but it's not limited to those examples. Here, the Torah is being very general. They have some sort of practice. They don't eat meat, or they don't eat, period, at certain times, say the 9 days, whatever it is. And now they want to go back to eating meat during that time period, or to at least be allowed to eat, period, during that time. Tzarich hatara. They need hatara. Hatara is hatarath nidarim, which we'll get into forthwith. We've tach b'charata shemitcharet shenahagbo l'shem neder, and he should begin when he consults with the chacham or the beit din that is performing this release of the vow. He should begin with expressing his regret or his remorse that he did this and in the form of a neder. If he ever did, he did it because he thought it was a good thing to do, but it wasn't a neder, and he will be released. So when he said lahatiram lahem, it must be that the Torah was saying that the one cannot just tell them it is permissible. It can only become permissible to them, to these who hold this particular prohibition, through a halachic legal mechanism that has to be performed. I'll bring the Rambam's, I guess, his version of how this works. The Rambam has Sefer Haflah, right? The Rambam has Haflah means, like we said, utterances, usually utterances that are binding. And he has laws of Shavuot and Nidarim. Shavuot is, I guess, vows to take upon something. Neder is a promise to do something. Usually it's one's in the negative, one's in the positive. One's swearing to the truth of something, one is swearing to perform something. There's other distinctions in there. There's two separate books about it. We're going to see that. Let me show you right here because we can. Hold on, I have to put on the screen. Sorry about that. We're jumping to the Rambam right now for the sake of those who want to see this. So here's Shavuot and Nidarim, and Niziruth and Arachim and Charamim. So he's going to explain what Shavuot are and Nidarim are. Niziruth is a particular type of vow that a person takes to practice like a Nazir. We're not going to get into that yet. And Arachim and Charamim are different valuations, donations basically to the temple. So the Rambam talks about Hatarat Nidarim in Nidarim. He says, he references what we saw in Shavuot, which is basically the same mechanism. So the Rambam first describes what the Shavuot are, and here he's going to explain how a person gets out of it. What is Hatarat Nidarim? And it's very important that he mentions this. Hold on a second. Here he says that there's certain types of the times when a person is completely released from his vow because he, for example, it was done, ba'ones means he was forced into it. Okay, hold on a second. Let's go find it over here. Here. This is in the 6th parak. He uttered this psalm vow, and he's regretted it. And he sees that he's very troubled that he kept this. Now he's changed his mind. Something's come about. Nolad. In this case, it doesn't mean born. It more means there's a recent development. He didn't anticipate this when he took the vow. And now he regrets it because of this nolad, whatever it is that came up. He should go inquire, in this case, request of one chacham. Chacham is the Rambam's term for what you and I would call a rabbi, a legitimate rabbi, not those types who, just do the outward type of motions and all, but are unfamiliar with the sources and how to apply them. Or for 3 ordinary people who make an ad hoc based in, if there is no actual chacham there, and then they permit him, means they release him from this vow. And now it becomes permissible for him to do that which he promised not to do, or he swore not to do. Or now he does not have to do that which he swore to do. Ones are negative, ones are positive. And this is called the release of vows. And if it's a neder he took, so it would be called release of nidarim. Heter, in this case, is a verb. Okay, I guess the shorah should be nun taf resh, and there's not supposed to be a yud in this word. By the way, if we spell the vowels, there'd be a dot in the taf, like hefsed, or in other forms. It's basically a hifiel, and the first letter of the shorish falls out. Give other examples. We saw other examples before. Like I said, the one that came to mind first was hefsed. What else could be there? Someone give me another shorish over there. Hispik, so it would be hespek. Enough that's there, be hespek. When we say hatan as imperative form of the verb, okay, they're basically the same. Hatorah shavuot heter shavuot. V'davar zeh ein lo ikar klal b'torah shebichtav. And this matter, you can't really find it in the written Torah. Why? Because the Torah says lo yachel devaro. We're going to read into this. Let's continue Rambam. Ela kach lamdu mi Moshe Rabbeinu b'pia Kabbalah. They actually learned this from Moses as a matter of tradition. It says a person takes a vow, he promise whatever it is, he shouldn't disgrace or he shouldn't secularize, he shouldn't disavow what he has said. He has to keep his word. He himself shouldn't do it. Derech kalu rosh, flippantly, bishat nefesh, or arrogantly, kinyan shnemar, as it said, to disgrace the name of your Lord, means that type of thing you shouldn't do. But if he somehow has regretted it, now he wants to take it back, chacham matirlo, the wise man can do so. He himself shouldn't, but if he's taken, he says something he shouldn't have said, so you can get out of it through the help of someone who knows better, especially once he's learned his lesson. One man can't release his own vow. He has to, or his own oath, he has to go to the um, and a person cannot release where he should he should yield greater sage. In a place where a person still taught him his Torah, asur lo latir elamidat rabo. So he's not allowed to. His Rebbe is there. So this, what it is, the Torah is talking about when he said this practice that is considered a vow. If there's something that's inherently permissible, because it is some sort of mistake, they thought it really is forbidden. They really thought that, not that they took it upon themselves or their ancestors took it upon themselves not to eat potato chips for whatever reason. They really believed that potato chips was one of the 613 commandments. Thou shalt not eat potato chips, just like it says, thou shalt not eat pig. Well, it doesn't actually say that, but you understand pig is on the forbidden food list in this week's parsha, nonetheless. So everybody knows not to eat that, and everybody knows that it says 3 times in the Chumash, don't eat, see the kid in its mother's milk, and that's basically the source for the whole milk and meat issue. So they thought potato chips also similarly. It turns out not, and the sages never said anything about potato chips either, and they never saw potatoes. But if they had this idea that somehow or other it's forbidden, lo havi ki'ilu kibulum b'neder. It is not like they took it upon themselves in the neder. The implication is they could just be informed of their mistake and they could go back to eating potato chips. And there's nothing solemn about this. So here's the Beis Yosef. The he quotes the tour over here. This is just a quote, and he says you can find the basis for this in Nedarim on the 15th page. Tanya devarim amutrim v'achrim nagu b'hem yisur iyata rashai lo atiram b'fnehem shenemar lo yachel devaro. This line is right there in the Talmud. He's also going to point out some psachim. The Brisa says that there are things that are permissible and others practice as though it's forbidden. You can't. It says you ata, ata. It says, then just say one. Now it says in the second person, you are to just or to tell him it's permitted. Rashai is, by the way, sort of an Aramaic form of lahatir, to permit. Okay, lahatir also literally means to untie. In this case, it means you're not allowed to. Just permit it in front of them. Bifnehem, maybe this is a loaded word, as it says, he should not, I guess, let his word. He should keep his word. Lo yachel devaro. He shouldn't just let his word be disgraced or let his word be defiled. It also says Rish Parak Makom Shnagu. This is in Psachim Maiti Law. They also brought this line. This particular line is brought there and it's analyzed. The Beis Yosef continues. Mashma delin hog heter b'fnehem nami asur. And it said b'fnehem. What does he learn from this? You can't just go and eat potato chips in front of them either. It's usher for them, so you shouldn't put it in their face. No, I'm eating potato chips. And there in Psachim, it says that perhaps this rule only applies to Kuthians, who at the time that it was being discussed were considered basically wayward Jews, or not knowledgeable enough until they were declared to just be Gentiles, because it turns out their conversion was, aside from the fact that it was under duress, it turns out they had, till today, we do not hold the halacha that the Samaritans, as they call themselves now, are Jewish, despite the fact that they changed their story a few years ago and they now claim to be two lost tribes. They say, no, we're the Bnei Ephraim and Bnei Menashe, and we never were lost to begin with. Okay. By the way, at least Christian history knows, the Goyim have known this for a long time. They weren't making those claims back in, let's say, the first century, late Second Temple times. The Makom Shinam B'nai Torah, or we're just a place where the people there are not B'nai Torah, they're not knowledgeable. If you tell these people, by the way, that which you've been holding, potato chips are forbidden, no, it turns out you could eat them, they might then come to say, because of their lack of knowledge, that, oh, that which we have believed we shouldn't eat, we're allowed to eat, and they'll translate that and go back and even start eating pig or something like that. So that's why you have to worry about this. You can't just give people this heter. Katvua Tosafot v'Arash v'Kasheh. Tosfos and Rush, first the Tosfos and then the Rush after him, said it right there on the page. Actually, I think you could find this on Nun Aleph. Here's where it's introduced on Nun Amud Beis, but then Nun Aleph Amud Aleph, you actually get into the Tosfos there. And there's a few Tosfos there. He said, "Hey, Achitir Rabbi Beit Sha'an." There was a case of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi declaring that Beit Sha'an was technically not part of Eretz Yisrael because it wasn't under control during the times of the Second Commonwealth. That means his heter for Beit Sha'an, they didn't have to keep the laws of Shemitah and Yovel there. It's mentioned in Chulin on the 5th page. Mishum deheidu al Rabbi Meir shachal sham alei yarak. Rabbi Meir ate a forbidden food. What? During Shemitah year, the sages had prohibited eating basically vegetables, garden vegetables. In this case, it could be something like lettuce, alei yarak, some green leaf vegetable that people were wont to grow. Why? Shortly after the destruction of the Second Temple, they were still keeping the laws of Shemitah, but not of necessarily of Yovel. They're still keeping Shemitah. And there are people who are cheating. You're not supposed to be planting vegetables during Shemitah. So there are people who were doing so and then claiming, oh, it just grew wild because, we ate our meal over here. We spat out some watermelon seeds. And that's why there's still watermelons growing here. It all grew on its own, spontaneous. So the sage says you can't eat any vegetables, basically, that people tended to garden. By the way, they couldn't stockpile vegetables. The biblical commandment to keep Shemitah comes with the biblical promise that even though you're not going to be doing your planting and your reaping, etc., during the Shemitah year, you'll still have enough from the 6th year to get through quite a few years of no planting and no reaping. Yeah, but what about vegetables? That works with grains. Grains are a type of vegetable or type of grasses. So the staple grains, I can understand, we have ways of saving those for long term. And fruits, also, we have ways of saving them for long term. We juice them and then we allow them to ferment. We have wine and pomegranate wine, or the fruits as dried forms, and that's what people survived on for hundreds and thousands of years. But fresh vegetables were not something that could be kept for long term. What they used to do for vegetables, you had to pick them fresh. It was all assumed that without refrigeration and you have hot Israeli climate, cucumbers and lettuce that you pick today, already tomorrow they're starting to wilt, and by the second day, they're not even that useful. So vegetables were something that you had to keep on hand. So the sages said they're called sfihaim, like aftergrowth. You can't eat vegetables during Shemitah because you have to assume that they're being grown in improper ways, unless you could go out to where people are not planting. That's not their vegetable garden because it's a few minutes out of town or whatever it is. It's along the side of the road. You could eat wild vegetables that that no one actually planted. But if it's growing near the houses, you can't eat those vegetables. But they saw Rabbi Meir doing so in Beit Sha'an, below Maaser, okay? And he also ate it without Meiser. That means also this type of place, he's eating it without tithing it. Why didn't he have to tithe the vegetables? Normally you have to tithe vegetables that grow in the land of Israel. Why? Because Rabbi said that Beit Sha'an area is not part of halachically Eretz Yisrael. So Shemitah and Meiser and all those things don't apply. And by the way, there's also places in the land of Israel today, state of Israel, and the Arava, they say, that was never settled in Second Temple times. So the holiness of the land of Israel doesn't apply there. So they could grow vegetables there during Shemitah. And also the vegetables that come there, that grow there even during the non-Shemitah year, do not have to be tithed and etc. Why? Because it's not part of Eretz Yisrael. That's what Rebbe basically said. He said that this part of what we call Beishan, which by the way is right in the middle of the state of Israel nowadays, it was not halachically land of Israel. Mikol makom, amakom nagu bo isur. I think maybe this is a mistake. Someone double check that. Okay, they still were, the people around there are still considered part of Eretz Israel, so they would tithe their food in Beit Shan, and also they kept the laws of Shemitah there. Uferish Hari, Megillat Tarim, Dafka Devarim She'adu Alahem Shehimu Tarim V'Noagim Bahem Isur, Lefisha Rotzim Lachmir Latzmam. Says, must be, the question was here, how did Rebbe do this? Rebbe basically was telling the people, no, you could eat the food here. It's not considered part of Eretz Israel. The food doesn't have to be tied during regular years, and during Shemitah year, it doesn't have to be treated like Kedushat Shvit, whatever it is. How could Rebbe do that? It's against this line over here, which he said. You can't just tell people, oh, you've got it wrong. So the Re says, no, in the Megillah Starim, there is a distinction. If he says that they're mutarim, they're aware of the nature of what they're doing. Okay, that's one thing. It depends on why they're keeping this prohibition. If they're mistaken, they thought what they're doing is inherently the right thing because they just didn't know better. What's called a minhag ta'ut. So then you can permit it. So this over here is talking about a legitimate minhag. Legitimate minhag, can't just tell them, oh, it's mutter. Whatever you've been doing is wrong. Rabbi, when he permitted this to them, it's because they were making a big mistake. They were unaware of the facts. They really thought that Beit Sha'an was part of the land of Israel, and the laws of Shemitah and Yovel and Trumas and Meisers actually do apply there. He was just correcting them. They had made a mistake. That's the distinction. So you see, this idea in the Beis Yosef is pointing out this distinction in the Torah comes from this precedent brought by the Tosafists. That explains what happened in Beit Shan. It was a mistake that they thought that Beit Shan was part of the land of Israel. Technically speaking, even though it's right in the land of Israel, it technically was not sanctified as part of the land of Israel because it wasn't settled during Second Temple times. And you can also find this right there explicitly in the Yerushalmi. Rabbi Yossi Bar Bruno Omer, Kol Davar She'eino De'ah Bo Shehu Mutar V'Hu Toeh. If you have a matter that a person doesn't know any better, he thinks he doesn't know that's mutter, and he's mistaken, V'Noig Bo Isur, and therefore he keeps it as an isser. He thinks step on a line, break your spine, step on a crack, break your back is halacha l'maaseh. Nish'alu matirin lo. He asked the sage or whoever, he asked the rabbi, and they permit. And if he knows better, and he knows it's only mutter, but he has a practice to keep it like it's usher, it's forbidden. He asks, and they don't just permit it to him. Klomar, here's what it means. Ein matirin lo. It means no, not so readily. Klomar, im ba lechacham lishael im yachol lizalzel b'minhag shenagu bo avotav lo yatir lo chacham. If he comes and says, I just don't like this practice that my ancestors have over here, so the chacham's not supposed to forbid it. Or if you have just a single person, he took upon himself some sort of prohibition as a fence or to distance himself. He doesn't even get involved in such a thing. He's afraid, let's say, to eat forbidden fat. Forbidden fat is present in animals that are shechted, so he'll only eat chicken and fish. The sage shouldn't just tell him, okay, hatir memela, just like that, because this is like a solemn vow, as it says in the Dharam. However, so instead, what the sage should do is find some sort of regret, what's called a petach, okay, the opening. So once he uses the standard procedure of Taharat Darim, that's how we can get out of the minhag. And that is what the Rush said. So we quoted the Rush over here. The Rush was basically going through Tosfos. So he says, he'll continue over here. He continues, now we have this paragraph basically tells us the essential distinction that is brought up by the Torah. There are some minhagim that are what I would call legitimate. A legitimate minhag, which is taken on for a pious reason, or a technical reason, but it's a reason, and people know that that which they're treating as prohibited, they know that once upon a time it was permissible, and they know that perhaps others still keep it as permissible, but they're keeping it for whatever reason. There's a good reason, legitimate. So those, in order to get out of them, somehow comes time now to go back to the way they were, completely permissible. So Hatarat Nidarim is in order. However, if it's what we call a mistake, minhag ta'ut, or isur ta'ut, they're treating it as forbidden because of a mistake or a complete misunderstanding or a complete unawareness of the actual halacha. So that doesn't need any formal permission. They could just go back. They can be informed of what they're doing wrong and continue doing like the rest of Am Yisrael and practicing permissibility in this case. By the way, I haven't seen. Maybe someone could correct me, or someone could enlighten me on this matter. Hatarat Nedarim is usually an individual who's doing it. We don't have a group of people who do it on as a group. That is, the whole, let's say, community, 10 men who took upon themselves together. So they're going to all avoid. They're going to nullify through the permission of the sage or the Beit Din. They're going to nullify their practice altogether. It has to be done on an individual basis. I've never seen it that it's talking about otherwise, even though you do have a case of an individual who took upon a neder because it's part of community and he wants to now go back to the way it was without everybody else. I don't know. There's a little bit something missing there. Okay. Rabbeinu says here, Masha Kasa Rabbeinu, who's Rabbeinu? That's the Baal Turim. Beis Yosef continues, he gave this example. Not to eat meat at a certain time, or just not to eat anything, to fast at a certain time. He says he got that from the Rosh in the Dharm and the Ran in the last parak of the Dharm in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Kohen. Because of Mordechai parak Machon Shilo. It's also in that fourth parak of Psachim called Shinagu, and it goes Baimani at the end of Hilchos Shavuos, and he continues that the Ran over here says, and Rabbi Yehuda Kohen. And the Ram, I think it's Ram Rotenberg quoting them, said, Here was his example. They used to have a fast day before Rosh Hashanah. And some days they have a number of fast days before Rosh Hashanah. Or between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. These are still mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch, by the way. I don't know anybody who does these, but they're well documented. There was fasts before Rosh Hashanah and fasts between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Some don't. Some have a minhag. They don't eat meat or wine from the first day of Av, Rosh Chodesh there, or even from the 17th of Tammuz, what we call Bein HaMetzarim, until of course Tisha B'Av. So he doesn't want. He wants to not healthy. And Bari in this case means he's not the strongest person. So he wants fasting all these fasts, or he wants to go back to eating meat and drinking wine at certain times of the year. So he needs three regular people to conduct this release of the vows. They're going to release him from his vow. And the proof is from everything we said here, which is taken the Dharm, this line over here. And this is also what you get from studying Yerushalmi, right at the beginning of this parak in the fourth parak of Psachim. Shnagu da'avi kemo neder v'nishala chacham matirim lo. It's like a neder, which means solemn vow can't just stop and start doing otherwise. He has to get a release from the chacham, and the chacham permits it to him. For example, when he first took upon the practice, he thought he was going to do it forever. It's similar to when others have this practice, usually their intention was to do it all the time. They were going to keep this minhag forever. If he just did it once, and it's a standard practice, it's a well-known practice, whatever it is, so it's as though it's a neder. And therefore, in order to get out of it, he would need a formal release from there. And he says, and that's the end of this, the quote over here. He also says, where's the source for the tour? What he says earlier, he says, what if they practice this out of a mistake? They thought it's forbidden, and it turns out they just were mistaken. This is a quote from Rabbeinu Nisim in the Megillah Star V'Achi Ito Behedi of Yerushalmi. You can also find the Yerushalmi. So the Shulchan Aruch is going to conclude here his summation, which, by the way, you can find uh, in the Shulchan Aruch. This is similar to language that he quotes from the Torah and what he's ultimately going to write in the Shulchan Aruch. Let's read it. Nimtza didvarim amutarim v'achrim yodim she'em mutarim. So here's what the bottom line: there, things are permissible, and others know they're permissible. V'afal pichin, but despite that, regardless, noagu b'hem isur, they still keep it forbidden. Mishum siagu frishut, for whatever reason, as a offense around the Torah. Can't just tell them it's permissible. The atah means assuming you're someone who has some authority to explain halacha to people. Can't just do this. You can't just tell them, oh, it's permissible. You should tell them that they need a formal release from the vow. Hold on a second. Okay. The atirulem kedina tarat shar nadarim, and then they will release them like other cases of hataras nadarim. By the way, hataras nadarim, like we said in previous times, is another good introduction. Hataras nadarim, because it is entirely a facet of what we call rabbinic Judaism, Torah Sheba'al Peh. It's not in the Torah. This became a sticking point between what used to be called the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the Prushim and the Tzedukim. That was Second Temple times. Later, they called us Rabbinites, the Rabbinic Jews and the Karaites, and that's the way it continues today. So the heretical sects that don't really believe in Torah Sheba'al Peh, so they were always saying that what the rabbis have basically created over here, Hataras Nadarim, is nonsense and can't be done. And we've stuck to our Hataras Nadarim. Remember, like Rabbi Maimon pointed out, whenever you find a practice where we triplicate what we're saying, we say it 3 times, it's Lotzimi Liban Shel Tzedukim. We're trying to stick it to the Sadducees or the Karaites in this respect. This is learned from the Mishnah in Menachos. It talks about the reaping of the Omer. And because this was a real well-known machlokes, the traditional Jews, the Orthodox Jews, the Rabbinic Jews, the Pharisees, and the heretical Jews. The heretical Jews said that the Omer is always supposed to be reaped when? On a Motzei Shabbos, because there's Memocharat HaShabbat. And our tradition has always said that in context, and in many contexts, Sabbath means the Shabbat is not a reference to Saturday, the usual Sabbath, but to the Yom Tov of Passover, the first Yom Tov of Passover, the festival day. So we would always reap the Omer on a weeknight, whatever it is. Unless, of course, Passover started on a Sabbath, in which case they sort of coincided. But even those cases, nowadays the Karaites say, no, it's a week later. So basically, they were always insisting the Omer be reaped when? On a Saturday night. And we would do it whenever it happened to be the night after the first night of Passover, the second night of Passover. That's when we also start counting Omer. So whatever they did, whatever the emissaries of the temple people did to reap the Omer, they asked 3 times. With this sickle, is it the right time? Is it the right time? They'd ask it because we're sticking it to the Sadducees. And in this case, Hataras Nadarim is something about which we are very proud, and that's why we say it in triple. There's a major Hataras Nadarim, is known as Kol Nidre, and that's what's done right at the start of Yom Kippur, pointed out by, for example, Rav Shechter, where this started, this minhag. Doesn't say anywhere in the halacha that you're supposed to start Yom Kippur with a good Kol Nidre, even though it's mentioned by no less than the Shulchan Aruch. Yes, he mentions the minhag. Why? Because Yom Kippur was a day to celebrate Torah Sheba'al Peh. And those who did not believe in Torah Sheba'al Peh did not believe in Hataras Nadarim. Utilizing Hataras Nadarim is always recommended because it shows our confidence and our faith in the sages. We're not against using Hataras Nadarim. We don't never find that saying Hataras Nadarim should not be used. It's a last resort. The way the Rambam describes, and the way the other Rishonim have, and the way the Shulchan Aruch is describing to us also, Hataras Nadarim is a tool to be used. We are pro Hataras Nadarim. We want to help people get out of their Nadarim. Better that people not take vows and take things upon themselves and then not be able to keep them. And if they do, it's better that we find ways to help people out of these solemn vows. Nadarim are something we don't want to do. That's why you're asking, what does that have to do? Why are we starting Yom Kippur with Hataras Nadarim? We don't want to keep our promises. Yeah, we're too I guess impetuous. We're too youthful. We blurt things out when we shouldn't. We don't know how to control our mouths. See, sometimes we just say things that are redundant all the time, or worse. So we have to make up for that. So Taurus Nadarm is saying that the sages did not shy away from. It's not something the post can shy away from. Okay. To continue in the Beis Yosef. If whatever they're doing, their prohibition, is because of mistake, they really thought it was prohibited. So you may permit it to them without any formal act of release from the vow. You just tell them what you're doing is wrong, and you don't have to do it anymore. It's permissible. You don't have to keep this problem. There's more Shakal here. He's addressing this issue that the tour doesn't make notice of the ensuing Shakal there that's mentioned in the Shulchan, in the Rush and the Tosfos, that perhaps you also have to take into account who, are you dealing with Kuthians, Ignorami, a whole community thereof. Okay, so that's not an issue over here. It explains over here nearly Shein Bein Makom Shein B'nei Torah L'Makom Shein B'nei Torah. Really, this is a red herring. It doesn't really matter if you're dealing in a place they're all B'nei Torah or they're not B'nei Torah. Ignorami. El Inyan Linhog Heter B'fnehem. That's only brought up with what should you do in your own personal practice. Don't do it in their face. So yes, the whole potato chips are forbidden. So don't eat potato chips in front of them. That could be the issue. But with regards to rescuing them from their mistake, the halacha stands. If they have a reason why they're not eating potato chips, there's actually some good reason. For example, the big donuts before Passover, yeah, it makes sense. The potato chips used to be chametz, so they didn't eat them on Passover, and that's why they don't do it. Makes sense. Don't just tell them potato chips are permissible. Help them find a way out of it throughout Taurus and Dharm. But if there's some other reason, it's illegitimate. You could release it. You could tell them about it, and it shouldn't have to be a problem. Yeah, so that's what he says here, and that's why the tour didn't mention this. Okay, because it doesn't really come up. You have to just be smart. And I guess you should have said that. And when you go to some place and you see that the people there are ignorami, so be careful what you do. Don't just do things that you know are permissible. And by the way, there's more basis for this in the ensuing page in Maseches Pesachim, where it talks about none other than Rabbi Gamliel's sons. Rabbi Gamliel, apparently the second, who was the head of the Sanhedrin in the years after the destruction of the Second Temple. So his sons got around a lot. It says Hillel and Yehuda, and where's it? Hillel and Shimon, whatever it is. Rabbi Gamliel's successor was Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel the second, of course. So he has his sons there who got into trouble in all sorts of places. They for example, they went to the bathhouse together. They're both at the bathhouse at the same time. The practice was that brothers don't attend the bathhouse at the same time. But wherever they were, that was considered scandalous. Fine. So for reasons of modesty. By the way, they did so, and they just didn't want to tell them, that could be your own personal practice, but we know the Ikra Din, sometimes you end up at the bathhouse. Remember, not everybody had a shower back home. No one did, so that was something you had to do. Okay. There's another issue brought up over here. This is a Rashba, and the Rashba has basically understood this entire sugya entirely differently than the sources we see until now, the Tur and the Beis Yosef. The Rashba says, "Kol mi shenoig isur b'davar hamutar begeder efshar shehu chamur min haneder v'ashavua." If a person is keeping something upon himself as a prohibition for a good reason, a geder, to protect himself from doing something worse, it could be that this is even more strict now than a vow or an oath. Shenadarim v'ashvuot nishalin aleihem. Vows and oaths, what could he do? He asks the wise man to release him from it, and he gets released. When they take upon themselves these forms of prohibitions, so that they don't get close. Let's say the example I gave: the potato chips, they don't eat them because the potato chips are always cooked with chametz. So they don't eat potato chips on Passover for that reason. That's not just a neder anymore. That's even more strict than any other rabbinic prohibition. It's like a Torah prohibition, and for that there is no atar sadar. That will stay prohibited forever. When the Gemara first said that first line, people they're people have a practice that which is inherently permissible, they treat it like it's forbidden. Nishal ve'in matirin lo. Okay, they ask the sage for a release, and they're not given such a thing. Those have to stick. And the minhag toes, they continue saying, through the practice. Okay, and here the Shulchan Aruch throws in another important point that best, by the way, if a person takes on a certain practice, applies practice, or he's giving himself a geder, offense, he's protecting himself from worse isurim, what should he do? He should say, I'm doing this bli neder, or I'm trying to do this in a way I'm not taking this as a solemn vow. So this is what I put in purple is the other opinion mentioned in Shulchan Aruch. So when you look in Shulchan Aruch, you open up the Shulchan Aruch, what do you find? In Reish Yudalit, you find exactly, well, almost the halachic consequence, slightly different wording, but you find what the Shulchan Aruch describes here and here. He calls this the first opinion. It's ascribed to the Rashba in purple, he gives as a second opinion. It's been pointed out by the Ramah, for example, a very Ashkenazic authority, and the Vilna Gaon, that the halacha follows not this purple opinion, but what's over here in bold. This really what should be. At least that's what I thought when I came to Israel. But apparently, this particular halacha has been politicized. What do I mean by that? I heard now from two places with regards to the whole Kitniyot issue. The permission that has been given by Rav Kapach and reiterated by Rav Bar-Hayim, full minhag to in whatever form we've gotten to times. Let's just say the minhag is a ta'ut mineuve, and there are sources for such a thing. Worse than there's sources that mention this, the earliest most sources have actually come from the Karaites themselves, which means the worst of the worst minhag ta'ut. Case it falls into this category. If it's a minhag ta'ut, you just have to tell people it's totally fine to eat it. You thought that cooking rice on Passover and eating it is problematic because it might have chametz in it. It turns out that's a mistake. So now it's permissible. That is the opinion we're going to attribute to Rav Kapach and those who came after him. Let's say you were to argue, which I've also argued, that it's legitimate. Perhaps you don't want to eat cooked rice on Passover because the rice wasn't checked well. And indeed, just today, by the way, I was checking through. What was it? There was something leguminous. I had some sort of wheat of some sort, and there was a legume in there. Okay, and the reverse happens. In your legumes, in your beans and everything, you find some wheat. It's not unheard of, so that's why you should check it. But let's say you didn't do a good job checking, or you were soaking it for more than 18 minutes on your kitchen counter before you wanted to clean it, because these things need to be cleaned well. Happens all the time. So that's a legitimate reason why a person should not want to eat cooked rice on Passover. And yeah, that sounds good. But if let's say he wants to get out of such a thing, he no longer wants to keep that prohibition that he grew up with. So the Shulchan Aruch says Ataris Nadarim is the answer. Yet, and here's the funny thing with regards to the Kitniyos explicitly, the first thing I heard was that they leave out this line. Okay, they just leave it out over here. They say if it's a legitimate minhag that they have practice in Isser, Iatar Rashai Lati Ram, like the Rashba says down here, legitimate minhag and an Isser, that's it. No way out of it. It's a net there, no way out. And then I remember one guy being quoted says there is a way out. It's just not automatic way out. You have to get a Taras Nadarim. So if you hold Miman of Shach, either the Kitniyos minhag, whatever it may be, is a minhag tos, so I don't have to keep it, period. Or if it's legitimate, I'll go perform a Taras Nadarim, which the sages recommend that I do, and which for some reason is saying we do very easily nowadays. As a matter of fact, I know people do Taras Nadarim every week. For whatever reason, fine. If a Taras Nadarim is a very serious thing, we really believe in the Torah Shabbal Pass, we do a Taras Nadarim. They don't allow them not Taras Nadarim. Or you have those who will read this line that's in blue over here. They'll say, yeah, this works for all sorts of minhagim, but not for Kitniyos, which made no sense to me. I remember there was a Dayan who even said this. For some reason, if it was the examples that Shulchan Aruch mentioned, fasting at certain times a year, or not eating meat at certain times a year, things like that, so Hataras Nadarim will work to release someone from such a practice that he inherited. However, with regards to Kitniyos, no. Why? Because for whatever reason, that's why I say it's politicized. With regards to Kitniyos, that's become the issue that as defines who we are. For too many people, this is not part of the Golos mindset. We are Ashkenazim, we are Sephardim, and there, of course, there are a few people on the side, those the Ethiopians and those Yemenites and Gerim and I don't know, lost tribe people, if you have any who show up from all sorts of far-flung places. But basically, we're a majority Ashkenaz and Sephardim, and we each have chief rabbis, and these differences must be maintained at all costs. And therefore, because not eating kitniyot to whatever extent, whatever that may be, on Passover defines who you are, you have no hataras nadarim in this respect. And I cannot fathom why they don't just follow what the Shulchan Aruch says. This is coming from people who basically always want to keep Shulchan Aruch. So that's a head scratcher in and of itself. But it's very important to know. I think that I even saw this in a halacha sefer there, reading in shul the other day. It says that whole thing, Ashkenazic woman has converted to Sephardi youth because she married a Sephardi guy, or a Sephardi girl who grew up Sephardi, and she's married an Ashkenazic guy. What did it do in the houses and all that stuff? And by the way, stock that you can find in Avad Yosef says that this girl grew up Sephardi, what she should do in her Ashkenazic husband's house against what any decent Ashkenazic posek would say. Either way, it's in there. I am surprised he doesn't just quote the Shulchan Aruch over here as is. The psak of the Shulchan Aruch is, and always was, that everybody could get out of this prohibition by using a hataras nadarim. Okay, so I don't know. I haven't merited to figure this one out. But why it is that for some reason this piece of Shulchan Aruch is not utilized or is not taken at face value, despite the fact that it's very well sourced and endorsed by none other than the Ramah and the Vilna Gaon and many who came beforehand, and is the standard practice. And now we'll close with this. We'll get into the Rambam's particular opinion next week, God willing, because you look through these sources, we haven't seen the Rambam anywhere. The Beis Yosef normally invokes the Rif and the Rambam, but here we don't find the Rif. Here we don't find the Rambam, and the Rambam wrote a whole code. Does the Rambam agree to any of this? Does he disagree? What would the Rambam say? So that's the next time. Let's just make this these points over here, and we'll close. Wish everybody good Shabbos. If the whole issue is a mistake, whatever it is that people are keeping as an Ister, as argued by many, then it can be Jedism entirely. That's Rav Kapach's opinion, and others. That's been reiterated by the Beis Avad. If the custom, whatever it may be, is legitimate, then first, it can be abrogated through hataras nadarim for an individual. That's the Shulchan Aruch. It may be abandoned by those who have moved to a place where the custom does not exist. That's an issue that, God willing, we'll talk about next week when we get into the Rambam. Remember, it's talking about custom is local. It's not, even though we say we invoke the fathers, usually it's not genetic. It's more like assuming that people stay in one place their entire lives and for generations. And it's greatly misunderstood and exaggerated by many of its adherents. And that's the topic of what we discussed last year. There are those, for whatever reason, they say no chashash of kitniyos. They will not have rice, period. Even though we saw, like the Chai Adam points out, describing what the Ramah himself held. And that is, why should rice or any beans or peas be more prohibited than wheat itself? Wheat and other forms of grain like barley and spelt, those can actually become chametz, but we still eat those in Passover. How? By eating them matzah style. So too, there should be permissible ways to eat rice. Just like the wheat grains and the flour that we use to make the matzah have been protected from becoming chametz, so too, if we were to do the same with our rice or our beans or whatever it is that may or may not have some wheat mixed in, there's no chashash. Why are people more machmir with the kitnios than they are with the wheat itself? It's a good question, which means they shouldn't be. And indeed, the Ramah and the Chai Adam, for example, give examples about how decent Ashkenazic Jews who want to keep the minhag of kitnios for whatever reason, they don't think it's a legitimate minhag and they're not going to go through hataras nadarim, they keep it. They should at least know what they are keeping. Okay, thank you very much. Please don't forget to send in your questions and comments. We once again close with the prayer that we live to see the destruction of Israel's enemies and peace in our land. Shalom v'nitzachon. Have a Shabbat Shalom.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.